What's up guys, I hope you're all having a great day. Welcome back to the channel where in today's video I will be going over my thoughts on Season 1 of The Bad Batch and how this series has begun to tie in with the timeline of the greater Skywalker saga. I know I am a bit late in getting this video out to you guys and I apologize for that, but we are here now. And if you've clicked on this video, then that's all that really matters, right? We're a bit late, but we're all here and we're going to get into this. So Bad Batch Season 1 picks up around the conclusion of Clone Wars Season 7. We first met this crew of genetically mutated clones in the final season of the Clone Wars, where they were able to demonstrate a few of the differences that set them apart from normal clone troopers, but it wasn't until they got their own spin-off that the unique skills of Clone Force 99 were put on full display. And personally, I thoroughly enjoyed this show from start to finish. Episode 1 was a fantastic introduction where we got to see Order 66 from what can now be deemed as the perspective of rogue clones. And that was probably the most emotional episode of the entire season in my opinion, that or episode 16. Overall, I think this season of The Bad Batch did a masterful job of showing how the galaxy transformed under the Empire's new regime. I was very interested in the episodes where we got to see the Empire invading and or taking over certain planets and demanding that the people conform to their new ideals. I loved our visit to Ryloth where we got to see a young Hera Syndulla along with her parents and of course Chopper. I think there was a nice little tie-in there with Kanan as well since we got to see his experience with Order 66 in episode 1. It was a cool parallel between these two characters within this show as we got a subtle sneak peek into each of their earlier lives, which had been referenced in Star Wars Rebels, but of course those were things we had never seen on screen. And it's also in these episodes set on Ryloth that we meet Captain Hauser, who is the clone who eventually gives this grand speech in front of his brothers, who are all lying in wait under the command of Crosshair for the arrival of the Bad Batch. He helps the Bad Batch to escape Ryloth, and then, through this speech that he delivers, convinces a few of his fellow clones to lay down their weapons. And that scene has raised one very important question that people are going to continue to talk about for a while. And that question is, will we see a clone uprising at some point down the road? And if I were to take sides, I would say yes. I think there will be a rather large-scale mutiny among the clones against the Empire as their inhibitor chips begin to weaken and somewhat wear off, and as more and more of them begin to see that the Empire is attempting to phase them out, and they're nothing more than pawns. I hope that this is something that we get to see, and if that's not the direction they go, I'm still very interested in seeing what Dave Filoni is setting up with moments like those, where we really see this internal conflict within the clones, and there's this hesitation to follow Imperial orders. But pushing things along here, let's now take a minute to talk about the stars. Personally, I really like Omega. I find her character to be fascinating, and considering the reveal about her lineage, which did come as a bit of a surprise to me, I am very interested to see where her story goes from here. Now, obviously, the general assumption was that Omega was a clone of Jango Fett in some form or another. His DNA was incorporated in some way, but I didn't see her essentially becoming the female version of Boba in a way, with the two of them being the only unaltered, pure genetic clones of their father, Jango. With that being said, however, I loved this idea. I'm really interested to see how they continue to develop that idea down the road, and possibly to see what happens if and when Boba and Omega do run into each other. In regards to the rest of the crew, I like them all. I think all of these characters have great potential. We saw Hunter take on sort of a Din Djarin role in the way that Mando did with Grogu. He's sort of like the adoptive father in a way to Omega, although they are brother and sister too technically, but that actually scared me for a second. I wasn't a huge fan of how much this show seemed to mirror The Mandalorian at times, particularly with the way they kept getting sent off on different missions and whatnot, similar to what Mando does for pretty much the entirety of Season 2 of The Mandalorian, but the story did come around and eventually established its own identity, and I think that's something that will continue to happen going forward as these stories continue to move in different directions. It is interesting, however, and this is something we may get into further in the future, to consider how ultimately Omega, Grogu, Din Djarin, and Boba could all potentially cross paths one day, as they're all actually loosely tied together. Omega and Boba are brother and sister, the son and daughter of Jango. And Jango obviously has ties to Mandalore. Din Djarin, the Mandalorian, now knows Boba, and obviously Grogu and Din have a strong relationship. So I'm not necessarily predicting that these characters will all meet down the road, but we could see some sort of dynamic tie-in with them as these new areas of exploration continue to come together. Chapter. Wrecker, Tech, and Echo are all unique and fun in their own way. I wouldn't have minded a bit more development for them, but I'm not actually complaining too much about that because I'm actually generally a big fan of focusing on the main characters, who in this case happens to be Omega and then to a lesser degree Hunter and Crosshair. And there's obviously plenty of time for those characters to develop in the future, as Season 2 has already been confirmed, so that's all good and well with me. I also think it's worth mentioning that Omega is actually older than the rest of the Bad Batch. It's sort of a funny concept to wrap your head around whenever she references that or brings it up, that this little girl, maybe 12 or 13 years old, was there when these grown men were born. And that's another parallel actually between Grogu and Din Djarin. Grogu is older than Din, but he's still just a child. There's nothing super significant about this age difference for Omega and the rest of the Bad Batch right now, but I do think it's an interesting talking point because obviously this means that should they all die on their own terms, Omega will long outlast her brothers and sadly be left all on her own again at a relatively young age. But now, finally, let's talk about our fallen brother. Before this season even began, people were speculating that Crosshair would betray the Bad Batch. He's always been a bit different than his brothers with regards to his morality and his perception of right and wrong. He does what he needs to do to get the job done, and being the good soldier that he is, Crosshair follows orders. All the time, regardless of their implications. Initially, it's the activation of his inhibitor chip that drives him to join the Empire. But as we have now come to learn, Crosshair has voluntarily elected to stay with the Empire even after having his chip removed. He has quickly climbed the ranks, now frequently giving orders rather than taking them, although he is still clearly nothing more than a pawn to his higher ranking commanding officers. But the Empire still gives Crosshair purpose. He does not care about people's perception of good and evil. He's following this belief, which has become pretty common in the Star Wars universe, that there is no right or wrong side in the times of war. The good guys do bad things just as the bad guys do. Crosshair has chosen his side because he wants to win. He wants to be remembered for something. He craves purpose and recognition, and he favors those things over the potential sense of belonging that his brothers can provide. He is twisted, but there is conflict. In the finale, he chooses to stay on his path. He refused to return with Omega and the rest of the crew, but we have seen a shift in his mindset. Early on in this season, he wants to kill Omega, but in episode 15, he tries to send her off-world instead, and in episode 16, he saves her life. Crosshair's mentality is changing. His eyes may be opening little by little as he struggles more and more to refuse to do what is right. But as is often the case with these stories, only time will tell if he can find his way back to the good side before it is too late. So to reiterate my overall feelings, I was pleasantly surprised with this show. I really thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. I do wish we didn't have any filler episodes, but just like Mando and the Clone Wars and Rebels, I think that's just the name of the game, and really, that's okay. It can just be frustrating for us as we wait each and every week, and then we get a bit of a letdown here and there, but overall, I can't complain. I really liked this show. It made me feel much more emotion than I was expecting coming in, and I can't wait for Season 2. Honestly, I think the biggest reason I was able to enjoy it so much is because I came into this series with virtually no expectations. Unlike a lot of people, I wasn't all that intrigued actually when Disney announced the production of this show. I knew I would watch it, but it wasn't something I was dying to see by any means, and because of that, I was able to simply take the story for what it was and get caught up in this new adventure. And ideally, I think that's the way to watch any new movie or show. Of course, we're always going to have things that we hope to see, but at the end of the day, it's better to just go into things thinking, I can't wait to see how this plays out, rather than this better happen or I'm going to be angry. At least that's my perspective on it now, because I've been on both sides of this, and it's really difficult to go in with no expectations. It's pretty much impossible, really, if you have some previous attachment or understanding of an old character, but with this show, I was able to do that because although we had seen them before, I wasn't really invested in any of these characters at all. So I'm not saying you can't have any expectations or want to see certain things, but for me, it's better to not get too invested in those hopes because ultimately, I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment. Now, in regards to some of the legacy characters who some of us predicted might show up, like Darth Vader and Ahsoka and Boba, They didn't, and for me, that's perfectly fine. In fact, I kind of preferred it that way, at least for now. I don't think it's necessary to bring these characters who everyone's familiar with into every single new story. Let the characters walk their own path, and if those old faces do show up down the road, that's cool too. We'll all probably love it and it'll be awesome, but it's not something we have to have in order to build a great story. Especially not in the first season of what is now confirmed to be a multi-season series. And now the last thing that I just want to touch on is this cloning theme that appears to be building to a much greater plot point. There's speculation that we may end up seeing the canon manifestation of Starkiller, who is Darth Vader's apprentice from Legends, and that's something that I'm still sort of torn on. I'm not really sure that that's something I want to see, to be honest. It could also be building to Palpatine's master plan on Exegol with his own regeneration. It could be pertaining to Snoke, or it could be tying to Grogu, or maybe some character we just don't know about yet. Who knows? But in the end, it's all about how they pull it off and what these revelations do to benefit the overall story. So I'm very interested to see where they take that, and I'm not strongly opposed to anything. I just hope whatever they're heading towards, it's impactful, and even more importantly, I would hope that this storyline strengthens the continuity of these stories we already have, rather than making things even more confusing. I think that's very important, and I will put my faith in Dave Filoni to see that through, as he's given us no reason to doubt him to this point, at least not in my opinion. But that is going to wrap things up for this review. Again, I really enjoyed this series, and I will be looking forward to Season 2 for sure. I think it will be even better than Season 1 now that we've established all of the main characters and set the direction of the story. But comment down below what you guys thought about this first season of The Bad Batch. Please remember to give this video a like to support the channel, subscribe to the channel for future Star Wars content, and of course, may the Force be with you always.